What if an entire nation's wealth could be built on a single revolutionary idea? In the early 1720s, France, teetering on the edge of bankruptcy after decades of royal excess, was given a lifeline by a charismatic Scottish gambler named John Law. His proposal was audacious. Replace the kingdom's cumbersome gold and silver with a new, modern form of wealth paper money. For a dazzling moment, it worked beyond anyone's wildest dreams. Paris became a city of instant millionaires, where servants became masters overnight, all fueled by shares in a mysterious venture in the New World, the Mississippi Company. But as the frenzy reached a fever pitch, a terrifying question began to surface. What is the true value of a piece of paper backed only by a promise? This is the story of the Mississippi Bubble, history's first great speculative mania and catastrophic crash, a cautionary tale of innovation, greed, and financial illusion whose dramatic echoes still resonate in our global economy today, 3 centuries later. It's a story of how quickly a dream of infinite riches can become a nightmare of absolute ruin. In 1715, the sun set on the reign of Louis XIV, leaving France not in glory, but on the precipice of ruin. The kingdom was bankrupt, crushed under the weight of endless wars and royal extravagance. The state's coffers were empty, its debts astronomical. Into this desperate vacuum strode a figure of audacious intellect and shadowed reputation. John Law, a Scottish gambler, duelist, and financial theorist who had fled his homeland. He arrived in a Paris shrouded in economic gloom, a city where wealth was tangible, measured in the clink of gold and silver coins that were now impossibly scarce. Law saw not a crisis, but an opportunity. He sought an audience with the regent, Philip II, Duke of Orleans, a man ruling in the name of the young King Louis XIII. In the gilded but decaying halls of the Palais Royal, Law presented his revolutionary thesis. He argued that a nation's wealth was not its hoard of precious metals, but the productive capacity and commerce of its people. He proposed a radical solution: a national bank that would issue paper notes. This paper, he claimed, would be more flexible and efficient than gold, a lubricant for the seized gears of the French economy. It was a system built on a concept as insubstantial as air, yet as powerful as belief itself. The court was aghast, viewing it as the ravings of a foreign adventurer, but the regent, a pragmatist cornered by desperation, listened intently. In Law's confident eyes, he saw not a gambler's bluff, but the chilling, exhilarating possibility of a new future, a kingdom rebuilt not on gold, but on trust. The audacious proposal was on the table, a single sheet of paper against a mountain of debt. The fate of France hung in the balance, waiting for the regent to roll the dice. The air in the room was thick with the scent of candle wax, and the heavy weight of a kingdom's last hope, a moment of profound quiet before the storm. With the regent's cautious blessing, John Law's gamble began. In May 1716, he opened the Banque Générale, a private institution, in a modest building that would soon become the heart of a financial revolution. Initially, Parisians were wary. For generations, they had trusted only the heft of gold and silver. This new paper money seemed like a phantom, a trickster's promise. Law, however, was a master of psychology. His bank functioned with impeccable integrity, always ready to exchange its notes for specie on demand. Confidence, the true currency of his system, began to build. The notes were convenient, lightweight, and safer to carry than a purse full of coins. Then came his masterstroke. Law persuaded the regent to decree that his paper notes would be accepted for the payment of taxes. This single move transformed the notes from a private convenience into an instrument of the state. Everyone who owed taxes now needed Law's paper. Demand solidified, and the notes began to circulate widely, breathing life into a moribund economy. Shops became busier, artisans found work, and the hum of commerce returned to the streets of Paris. The success was undeniable. By 1718, the regent, now a true believer, nationalized the institution, renaming it the Banque Royale. was now the effective controller of France's entire money supply. He had introduced a new paradigm, proving that the wealth of a nation could indeed be built on a foundation of paper, so long as that paper was universally trusted. The first phase of his grand experiment was a resounding success. The kingdom was being rebuilt, one banknote at a time, and the air was filled with a new, unfamiliar scent: optimism. The stage was set for a far grander, far more dangerous act. The Bank Royale was a success, but John Law knew that a currency needed more than just trust. It needed a foundation, a promise of future wealth to justify the ever-increasing volume of paper. His gaze turned westward, across the vast Atlantic, to France's immense but neglected colonial territory of Louisiana. In 1717, he consolidated several struggling colonial trading companies into one behemoth. The Compagnie d'Occident. He was granted a complete monopoly on trade and development in a territory that stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes. Law, the ultimate showman, then launched one of history's most effective marketing campaigns. He flooded Paris with pamphlets, maps, and broadsheets that depicted Louisiana not as the swampy, undeveloped wilderness it was, but as a biblical Eden, a paradise overflowing with riches. His artists drew maps showing mountains made of solid gold and rivers sparkling with emeralds. Engravings depicted friendly natives eager to trade priceless gems for simple trinkets. He promised tobacco plantations, vast silver mines, and a climate of eternal spring. To a French public starved for good news and desperate for a miracle, this was an irresistible fantasy. The Mississippi Dream was born. The company's purpose was twofold: to actually eventually generate wealth from the colonies, but more immediately, to create an asset so desirable that people would clamor to buy its shares. He merged the company with his Bank Royale, creating a symbiotic entity where the bank could print money to facilitate the purchase of the company's shares. It was a perfectly sealed, self-inflating system. The public, captivated by the promise of effortless, exotic wealth, was about to be swept up in a frenzy. The dream was so powerful, so alluring, that no one stopped to ask if it was real. The heart of this new paper of France beat loudest on a narrow, medieval Parisian street, the Rue Quincampoix. Once a quiet lane, it transformed into the world's first frenetic, open-air stock exchange. From dawn until dusk, it was a river of humanity, a chaotic crush of dukes and valets, ladies and laundry maids, all screaming bids and clutching paper promises of distant fortunes. The old social order dissolved in the acid of universal greed. A person's worth was no longer their name or their land, but the number of shares they held in the Mississippi Company. By late 1719, shares issued by the Compagnie d'Occident at 500 livres were trading for an astonishing 10,000 livres. People sold ancestral estates, anything of tangible value, converting it into these flimsy certificates endorsed by John Law and his patron, the Regent Philippe d'Orléans. Every building became an office, every window a trading post. In a famous account, a hunchback man earned a small fortune by renting out his back as a portable writing desk for frantic speculators to sign their contracts. They called him Le Bossu, a living symbol of this bizarre new economy. Fortunes were made in the time it took to cross the street. A footman who arrived with his master's carriage in the morning could leave in his own by afternoon. Having become a millionaire, itself was coined here, in this cauldron of speculation, to describe these impossibly rich commoners. The air, thick with sweat, perfume, and the metallic tang of fresh ink, buzzed with a manic energy, a belief that the paper in their hands was not just a symbol of wealth, but wealth itself. It was a collective delusion fueled by the desperate fear of being the only one left behind. This was the peak of Law's system, a city, a nation, hypnotized by a dream printed on paper. But in a street where value was invented every second, where opportunistic violence and theft became as common as transactions, how long could reality be kept at bay? The frenzy was unsustainable, a financial fever burning through the soul of Paris. By late 1719, Paris was a city utterly possessed, drunk on the intoxicating elixir of paper wealth. The boulevards and lanes pulsed with a feverish energy from one epicenter. The Rue Quincampoix. This once unremarkable medieval street had become the world's first open-air stock exchange, a chaotic theater of human ambition. It was here that John Law's system reached its spectacular zenith, birthing a new, aspirational word into the global lexicon: millionaire. The rigid social fabric of ancient regime France was unraveling in months. Cooks, valets, and artisans who had scraped by on meager wages found themselves, through a few shrewd or lucky trades, wealthier than the dukes they once served. These Quincampoix millionaires were a new breed, flush with unimaginable purchasing power. Stories of their fantastical fortunes became commonplace. A beggar, paid to let a frantic speculator use his hunchback as a writing desk, earned enough to purchase his own carriage. A tavern waiter, after overhearing a valuable stock tip, abandoned his post and returned an hour later to buy the very establishment where he had just served. This was a societal transfiguration played out in public. Lavish, gilded carriages clogged the narrow streets, their new owners draped in brilliant silks and gaudy jewels. The old aristocracy looked on with a potent mixture of horror and unconcealed envy, their inherited status suddenly devalued by this tidal wave of paper prosperity. It seemed the dream would never end. Every share was a ticket to paradise, every banknote a sacred promise of infinite growth. But in this glittering city of instant millionaires, tangible value had been replaced by collective belief, a fragile consensus that was about to be tested in the most brutal way imaginable. The edifice of paper prosperity, so brilliantly constructed, began to show its first hairline cracks. The catalyst was not a peasant or a merchant, but one of the highest nobles in the land, the Prince de Conti. Offended by Law's refusal to sell him a new issue of shares on preferential terms, the prince retaliated with breathtaking arrogance in July 1720. He sent 3 large wagons, their wheels groaning on the cobblestones, to the Bank Royale and demanded his immense holdings be converted to gold coin. The bank, its reserves already stretched perilously thin, was forced to comply. The sight of wagons laden with sacks of gleaming louis d'or, leaving its doors, sent a tremor of visceral unease through Paris. This was not a quiet transaction. It was a public spectacle of disbelief. Law, furious, used his influence with the regent, Philip II, Duke of Orleans, to force the prince to return most of the gold, but the damage was done. The act exposed a fundamental vulnerability. The system worked only as long as everyone believed in it. In a desperate attempt to shore up his creation, Law issued increasingly frantic edicts, forbidding citizens from holding more than 500 livres in specie, and attempting to outlaw gold as a medium of exchange. But these actions only stoked the growing panic. For the first time, a powerful figure had treated the paper not as wealth itself, but as a mere claim on real money. The whispers that started in the gilded salons became panicked murmurs on the Rue Quincampoix, quiet doubts exchanged over wine and cards. If a prince of the blood did not trust the paper, why should a commoner? The psychological foundation of the Mississippi bubble was beginning to erode, not from the bottom up but from the very top down. The magic was starting to fade, replaced by the cold, hard glint of fear. To combat the spreading doubt, John Law made his most fateful decision. Publicly challenged by nobles like the Prince de Conti, who sent carts to demand payment in gold for his shares, Law felt cornered. Instead of restoring faith in the link between paper and gold, he sought to sever it entirely. In a series of radical decrees issued in early 1720, he effectively outlawed gold. The final blow came with the decree of May 21, 1720, which planned to methodically devalue the paper currency. The public heard only one thing: their money was officially worth less tomorrow than it was today. The value of gold and silver coins was systematically reduced, while strict limits were placed on how much specie an individual could own. It became illegal to buy or own most gold objects. Police were authorized to search private homes, a terrifying violation that turned neighbors into informants. The paper liver was declared the one true currency of the realm. It was a move of breathtaking audacity, an attempt to force belief by eliminating all alternatives. But one cannot decree confidence. Instead of stabilizing the system, the move triggered a mass panic. Hysterical crowds descended upon the bank on Rue Quincampoix, the street of their dreams now a theater of despair. They hammered on locked doors, worthless paper clutched in their fists. It was a clear signal that the bank could not honor its promises. Those who understood the game knew this was the end. Foreign investors, and the shrewdest French speculators, began a frantic, clandestine effort to sell their shares and smuggle their wealth, now in gold, out of the kingdom. Gold was sewn into coats or hidden in false-bottomed carriages, a frantic gamble against law's patrols. The system that was meant to be a closed loop, endlessly circulating paper wealth, was now leaking value at an alarming rate. Law, in trying to cage the beast of finance, had only made it more desperate to escape. The unraveling was no longer a quiet whisper. It was a gathering roar. On May 21, 1720, Law, in a desperate attempt to control the inflation he had unleashed, announced a plan to devalue company shares in the paper currency. It was received as a tacit admission that the notes were worthless. The public's belief, the very soul of Law's system, vanished in an instant of collective terror. Just 6 days later, the decree was chaotically revoked, but the damage was irreparable. The government's panicked reversal only fueled the hysteria. The bubble had burst. Panic erupted. Rue de Quincampoix, once a glittering theater of dreams, became a grim stage for despair and rage. The frantic rush to cash in mountains of worthless paper led to deadly stampedes at the Banque Royale. At least 10 people were crushed to death in a single day, their bodies trampled in the desperate scrum for gold that was no longer there. Company shares, which had soared to over 10,000 livres, plummeted back to earth, wiping out fortunes overnight. The millionaires of yesterday became the desperate paupers of today, their paper fortunes turning to ash. This profound despair quickly curdled into targeted violence. Carriages of the newly rich were overturned and burned. A stockbroker was lynched by a mob after being mistaken for John Law himself. And Law, the celebrated genius and savior of France, became its most hated man. He became a virtual prisoner in the Palais Royal, protected by soldiers from the furious crowds baying for his blood outside. The dream of wealth created from pure ingenuity had crashed against the hard reality of human fear and greed. The brutal consequences of its collapse would leave scars on the French psyche for generations. A cautionary tale whispered long after the worthless paper was gone. As the kingdom he had reshaped descended into financial ruin, its architect became a fugitive. The glittering dream of the Rue Quincampoix had curdled into a nightmare of public fury. John Law, the Controller General of Finances, fled Paris on December 10, 1720, aided by his patron, the Regent Philippe d'Orléans, who arranged a carriage for his clandestine departure. He escaped with only a few hundred louis d'or, disguised to avoid the mobs his system had created, mobs now baying for his blood, burning his effigy where he was once hailed as a savior. His vast personal fortune, all held in now worthless company shares, had evaporated. The preacher of paper wealth had failed to keep any hard currency for himself. His flight took him to Brussels and eventually to Venice, the ancient republic built on trade in tangible goods. It was a cruel irony. The prophet of abstract wealth seeking refuge in the heart of old-world mercantilism, a city that counted its worth in gold ducats and shiploads of spice, not flimsy paper notes. Here the great innovator lived out his final years in relative obscurity and poverty. He spent his days gambling, a pale shadow of the high-stakes game he had played with an entire nation's economy, and writing memoirs to justify his actions and reclaim his intellectual legacy. He argued vehemently that his system was fundamentally correct, undone not by flawed theory, but by the public's avarice and the political machinations of his enemies. He was a man out of time, haunted by the John Law system, once hailed as the salvation of France, was now a national curse, a wound on the psyche of a great nation. He fled the country in disgrace in December 1720, a fugitive with little more than the clothes on his back and the phantom weight of a collapsed empire on his shoulders. He would die in Venice years later, impoverished and still addicted to the thrill of the gamble, a man forever haunted by the ghost of the paper wealth he had both created and vaporized. France was left reeling, burdened with a colossal national debt and a deep, abiding mistrust of paper money and centralized banking. This financial trauma would stunt its economic development for nearly a century, leaving it lagging behind its great rival, Britain. But the Mississippi bubble's impact rippled far beyond the borders of France, becoming a foundational myth of modern capitalism, a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of every stock exchange. It was the first time an entire advanced nation's economy was held hostage by the speculative value of paper shares. The patterns that emerged on the chaotic Rue Quincampoix. The media frenzy, the sudden millionaires, the blinding herd mentality, and the final, devastating crash became a grim blueprint for all future manias. From the South Sea bubble that burst in England the same year, to the railway manias of the 19th century, the roaring 20s that ended in the Great Depression, the dot-com boom of the 1990s, and the volatile world of today's digital currencies. The assets change from colonial trading rights to tech startups, but the human element remains dangerously consistent. The story of John Law is not history. It is a mirror. It reflects our own vulnerabilities, our collective capacity for delusion, and the eternal, perilous dance between innovation and irrational exuberance. The bubble never truly pops. It just reinflates, somewhere else for a new generation convinced that this time, it will be different.